What happens when a woman known for her grace walks into a room expecting warmth but finds subtle jabs wrapped in polite smiles? This isn't a story about loud conflicts or dramatic fights. It's about keeping composure. It's about quiet strength. And it's about the moment even the kindest person decides she's heard enough. What happened that morning on The View didn't start with tension. It began with twinkling lights, holiday decorations, and the illusion of comfort. But by the end of the segment, the tone of the room would shift, and no one would see it coming. The studio looked perfect, as it always does in winter. Warm golden lighting filled the set. Festive wreaths framed the windows. Candles flickered behind the sleek glass desk. Everything was arranged to feel cozy and welcoming. Then she walked in. Dolly Parton stepped onto the stage in black sequins that sparkled without drawing too much attention. Her blonde hair was styled in an unmistakably Dolly way, but softer and gentler than the larger-than-life persona fans see under bright lights. She waved to the audience, and her familiar, radiant smile brought applause from every corner of the room. But not everyone was smiling. Joy Behar watched quietly. No grin, no frown, just a measured gaze. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward as usual. "Please welcome the one and only Dolly Parton." The applause grew again. Dolly placed a hand over her heart in gratitude before taking her seat. She folded her hands neatly on the desk. A ceramic mug from The View sat between her and Joy, a simple object that suddenly felt like a barrier in a conversation that hadn't even begun. "Thank you for having me," Dolly said warmly. "It's good to be here." Her voice was gentle, familiar, and disarming. At first, everything went as expected. Whoopi asked about Dolly's newest music project. Another host mentioned her literacy initiatives. The room filled with polite laughter and admiration. Safe topics, safe ground. Dolly answered with ease, thoughtful, concise, never boastful or rehearsed. She spoke about creativity, giving back and growing up in the mountains of Tennessee, never imagining this kind of life. Then something shifted. Joy leaned forward, not loudly or aggressively, but there was a change, a tightening in her posture, and a slight tilt of her head. It was a subtle signal that she wasn't listening anymore. She was preparing. "So, Dolly," Joy began casually, but her tone had an edge. "You've been doing this a long time." Dolly smiled. "I have." "Decades," Joy continued slowly. "Different eras, different audiences, and yet, you've never really changed your image." A pause. Not long enough to interrupt, but long enough to feel intentional. Dolly blinked once, smile intact. "Well," she said lightly, "I've always believed that if you know who you are, you don't need to chase every trend." A soft murmur of approval spread through the audience. Joy didn't smile. "But don't you think," she pressed, "that there's something performative about that consistency? The big hair, the sparkles, the exaggerated femininity. Some people might say it feels a little outdated." And just like that, the atmosphere in the room changed. Whoopi shot a quick glance to the side. Another co-host shuffled her papers unnecessarily. The air grew heavy, not explosive, but tense. Dolly didn't stiffen. She didn't flinch. She didn't let her smile fade. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Well, Joy," she said gently, "I've never thought femininity was something to apologize for. It's simply one way of being strong." Joy's lips pressed together. "Sure," she replied, "but don't you worry that younger women might see that and think success requires looking a certain way? That being taken seriously means wearing all the glitter?" There it was. Not an outright accusation. Not a compliment either. Just enough doubt to linger in the air. Dolly's perfectly manicured fingers tapped once against the glass desk, soft, controlled, deliberate. "I think young women are smart enough to decide for themselves," she answered calmly. "And I trust them more than I trust labels." The audience applauded again, louder this time. Joy leaned back, arms crossed. I'm just saying," she added, "you've built a brand. And sometimes brands distract from substance." And that was the moment. Not when the words were spoken, but when Dolly understood their intention. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't open dialogue. It was erosion. Slow. Intentional. For the first time, Dolly looked directly at Joy. Not with anger, not with resentment. With clarity. "Well," she said softly, her voice steady as ever, "I reckon substance speaks for itself." Something in her tone had changed, barely perceptible, but undeniable. And Joy noticed. A faint smile crossed Joy's face, as if she thought she had finally gained an advantage. "Of course," Joy replied. "I just think it's worth examining." Dolly nodded once. "Then examine away," she said. And in that simple sentence, calm, controlled, unwavering, the entire room felt the shift. Because sometimes the loudest statement is made without raising your voice at all. And what happened next? That's when the silence became louder than anything anyone had said. I've lived my life in the open. The applause came fast, louder than before, fuller, almost protective. Joy didn't clap. She adjusted her mug instead, eyes locked on Dolly like a chess player calculating the next move. And Dolly, still smiling, still poised, still unaware that the conversation was only just beginning. The show attempted to reset. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer's silent cue nudged the panel towards safer topics. Another co-host pivoted gracefully. "Let's talk about the imagination library," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Over 100 million books. That's not charity, that's history." Now Dolly's eyes truly softened. This was familiar ground. Not fame, not applause, impact. "Well, honey," she said warmly, "books saved me long before fame ever did. A child with a book is a child with a door." The audience clapped again, was heartfelt this time. A few people even rose halfway out of their seats before sitting back down, caught between emotion and etiquette. Whoopi nodded approvingly. "That's what we love about you. You've always been about lifting people up." Joy's expression shifted just slightly, a subtle tightening. The kind of reaction someone has when praise feels excessive. Dolly either didn't notice or chose not to. For a moment, the room felt normal again. The candles glowed. The cameras glided smoothly between faces. The mug sat perfectly aligned on the glossy desk. Everything looked like a pleasant, controlled morning talk show. Then came a small sound. Ceramic scraping against glass. Joy slid her mug forward a few inches. "So, Dolly?" 2 words, different tone. The co-host beside her blinked, instinctively bracing. Dolly turned with the same warmth she offers everyone. Fans, strangers, presidents. It didn't matter. Her kindness wasn't selective. It was muscle memory. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. Joy smiled, not an inviting smile, a measuring one. "Do you ever worry," she asked slowly, "that your charity work, your goodness is part of the brand too?" A hush settled across the table. Not because it was the hardest question ever asked, but because it felt like a trap dressed up as intellectual curiosity. Dolly held her smile for 1 beat longer than necessary. "Joy," she answered gently, "I don't do what I do to look good. I do it because I remember what it feels like not to have." Joy nodded as if she'd predicted that response. "Sure," she pressed, "but philanthropy is convenient for celebrities. It creates a shield. So whenever someone questions the image, the fans say, 'Oh, but she gives away books.'" A murmur moved through the audience. People shifted in their seats. You could feel the urge to defend her rising in the room. Dolly's eyes narrowed slightly, barely noticeable, like a curtain moving in a breeze. "Well," she said calmly, "if my work helps people, I don't mind if it helps my image too. But that's not why it was built." Joy leaned in, sensing the air tightening. "Okay," she said, voice sharpening, "but let's be honest. Sweet Dolly, kind Dolly, harmless Dolly. That's a performance, isn't it?" Whoopi inhaled, almost stepping in, then stopped. Sometimes you let someone reveal themselves. Dolly didn't flinch. Instead, she gave Joy a small, thoughtful nod. The kind you give when you're choosing grace over humiliation. "Honey," Dolly said softly, "everything we do in public is a performance, yours included." A ripple of nervous laughter broke out. It wasn't a jab. It was a truth, delivered so gently it was hard to challenge. Joy's expression hardened. "No," she replied flatly. "My strength is conversation. Yours is an act. The giggle, the eyelashes, the cute country doll routine. People treat you like a saint." Dolly's fingers tightened together. Her manicured nails pressed lightly into her skin. She remained controlled and steady. "Joy," she said calmly, "I've been called many things. Doll isn't the worst." Joy scoffed. "You're missing the point." "I'm addressing it," Dolly answered, "just not in the way you hoped." That response felt sharp and clear. Around the table, discomfort grew. One co-host suddenly found her cue cards very interesting. Another wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Joy had more to say. "Here it comes," everyone thought. "You act like this symbol of empowerment," Joy continued, sensing her momentum. "But your image relies on how men wanted women to look for decades. Big hair, tiny waist, flashy sparkle. That's not exactly progressive." There it was, not curiosity, judgment. Dolly blinked slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was still sweet, but no longer soft. "Joy," Dolly said, steady and clear, "I didn't build myself to please men. I built myself to survive." Her words were simple. No theatrics, no raised voice. but they carried more weight than all the sequins in the studio. Joy opened her mouth, ready to strike again. Dolly lifted one finger, polite, measured, firm. "And before you decide what kind of woman I am," she continued, "you might want to ask yourself something." Joy's expression tightened. "What?" Dolly smiled again, but it lacked warmth. It was composure. "When you look at me," she asked quietly, "do you see a woman who chose her own life, or do you only see what you've been taught to resent?" The studio became completely still. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was a mirror. Joy tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Resent? I'm just tired of watching grown women play dress-up and call it empowerment." An audible gasp rippled through the audience. The holiday set, with its glowing candles and festive wreaths, suddenly felt like a stage for something darker. Dolly's gaze shifted briefly to the camera, then back to Joy, and for the first time it became clear. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying not to lose her temper. "Joy," she said evenly, "I've never asked you to like my hair." Joy shrugged. "Well, it's hard not to notice it." Dolly nodded slowly. "And I've never asked you to approve of my choices." Joy leaned back again, a smug look returning. "Then why are you so defensive?" Dolly paused. The silence stretched long enough for everyone in the studio to feel it. "Because you're not discussing my choices, you're mocking them," she said calmly. Joy's face flushed. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Dolly asked softly. "Or is that what bullies say when they are called out?" The word bullies rolled across the room like distant thunder. Whoopi's eyes widened. One of the co-hosts froze mid-breath. Joy stiffened, her tone sharpening too quickly. "Don't call me a bully," she hissed. "I'm asking questions." "That's the thing, Joy," Dolly replied without raising her voice. "Questions are meant to understand. Yours are meant to cut." Joy's smile vanished entirely. For a split second, something flickered behind her eyes, calculation. Push harder, break her, get the clip. And she did. "Let's get to the truth," Joy said, leaning forward. "You're not the saint people think you are. You're a businesswoman who sold a fantasy, and you did it so well that people forgot to ask who you really are." The air tightened. Even the audience, usually eager and reactive, fell silent. It felt like something sacred had just been touched. Dolly didn't move, but her hands slowly unfolded. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then settled. A subtle brace, almost invisible. Her smile faded into something neutral, controlled. When she spoke, her calm was more unsettling than anger ever could be. "Joy," she said softly, "you keep talking like you know me." "I know what you show," Joy shot back. Dolly nodded once. "And you keep poking," she continued, "like you're hoping I'll snap so you can feel justified." Joy scoffed. "That's absurd." Dolly leaned in, not dramatically, not aggressively, just enough to close the distance. "No, honey," she said quietly. "That's exactly what this is." The studio held its breath. Because Dolly Parton, America's sweetheart, had stopped being sweet, and Joy Behar had just realized she might have pushed the one person in the room who didn't need to raise her voice to dismantle a narrative. Joy opened her mouth to respond. Dolly spoke first. "One more question like that," she said, still calm and measured, "and we'll have a very different kind of conversation." Joy blinked. For the first time all morning, she didn't have a line prepared, but retreat wasn't her style. A thin smile curved across her face, sharp and deliberate. "Good," she replied, "because I'm not done." The way she said it made producers behind the cameras instinctively reach for their headsets. Everyone recognized it now. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a collision. They should have cut to commercial. The entire room felt that invisible tension when a conversation crosses a line, and no one wants to be the one to pull the cord. Behind the desk, a holiday candle continued to flicker, absurdly peaceful, unaware that the atmosphere had grown sharp enough to draw blood. Joy adjusted in her seat, energized. This was her territory conflict disguised as conversation. Dolly leaned back slightly, hands resting together again. But the softness was gone. What remained was composure honed into something deliberate. Joy cleared her throat. The next words would decide everything. "You know," Joy began, pretending to reflect, "people love to protect you, Dolly. That fascinates me. You say one sweet thing and the audience applauds like you've solved world peace." A few uneasy laughs floated through the studio. Dolly didn't react. Joy continued, gesturing loosely, "You talk about kindness and empowerment, but you've never really challenged the system. You benefited from it. You played into it. That's not bravery. That's marketing." The word marketing hung in the air. Whoopi leaned forward. "Joy, no. Let her answer. Joy interrupted quickly. I'm genuinely curious. No one believed that statement. Dolly took a slow breath through her nose. Not dramatic, not obvious, just the kind of breath you take when deciding whether to smooth things over or finally say what needs to be said. I've challenged plenty, she replied calmly, just not in the way you seem to prefer. Oh? Joy raised an eyebrow. How so? Dolly turned her head slightly toward the audience, not seeking approval but grounding herself. I challenged poverty by refusing to stay poor, she said. I challenged illiteracy by putting books in children's hands. I challenged exploitation by owning my work. Joy smirked. And you challenge beauty standards by exaggerating them. A sharp inhale swept across the room. Dolly's eyes hardened just enough. Joy, she said, voice steady but unmistakably firm. You keep confusing your opinion with authority. Joy let out a short, dismissive laugh. That's rich. No, Dolly replied evenly. What's rich is sitting behind a desk judging women's lives from a distance. This time, the applause wasn't hesitant. It was decisive. People were no longer uncertain about which side they were on. Joy's smile vanished. You're deflecting, she snapped. This whole persona, this sweet country girl routine, it's manipulative. You use charm so people won't question you. Dolly leaned forward slightly, her elbows brushing the table's edge. Let me be very clear, she said. I have never asked anyone not to question me. Joy crossed her arms. Then answer this honestly. If you're so empowered, why cling to an image created by men? That was the line. Not new, not clever, just relentless. Dolly held Joy's gaze for a long moment, long enough that the studio became completely silent. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed to stop moving. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. I didn't cling to anything, she said. I chose. Joy scoffed. You call that choice? Yes, Dolly answered, because choice doesn't have to look like yours to be valid. Joy shook her head. You're glorifying conformity. Dolly offered a faint smile, not kind this time. And you're using contempt as a weapon. Her words hit like a precision strike. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Dolly kept going. You know what bothers me most, Joy? She said. Joy rolled her eyes. It's not that you don't like my hair. It's not that you don't respect my work. Dolly's voice stayed steady. It's that you keep acting like there's only one right way to be a woman, and somehow it just happens to look like you. The studio erupted. Applause filled the room before anyone could stop it. A few people even stood. Whoopi exhaled sharply, part impressed, part concerned. Joy's face flushed red. That's absurd, she snapped. You're projecting. No, Dolly replied quietly. I'm observing. Now Joy leaned forward, her voice rising, frustration spilling over. I'm tired of women like you getting a free pass because you smile and donate money. You don't get to avoid scrutiny just because people find you likable. Dolly nodded once. And you don't get to hide your hostility behind scrutiny just because you enjoy putting people down. Joy's jaw tightened. That's insulting. So is being called a cartoon, Dolly responded without blinking. So is being reduced to my appearance. So is having my life's work dismissed as a costume. The room felt electric. This wasn't daytime television anymore. This was a reckoning. Joy's voice rose higher. You want honesty? Fine. I think your whole image makes women seem childish. I think it tells them they need to be cute to fit in, and I think that's irresponsible. The silence afterward was brutal. Dolly's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. She straightened her jacket slowly, deliberately. You don't get to tell women what empowers them, she said, each word measured. Not you, not me, no one. Joy laughed bitterly. Spare me the lecture. Dolly's voice dropped lower. This isn't a lecture, she said. It's a boundary. And that single word changed the air in the room. For the last 20 minutes, Dolly continued, her tone steady but unmistakably firm. You've talked at me, not with me. You've mocked my appearance, questioned my motives, and dismissed my choices. Joy started to interrupt, but Dolly lifted her hand, not to silence her,